Every year, in the weeks leading up to Halloween, my mom used to take my sister and I to the pumpkin patch at Woolbach Farm. It was a popular seasonal attraction, a family-owned vegetable farm about a half-hour's drive from the suburbs where I grew up in Missouri. Many locals remember it fondly, but I recently learned that I am the reason it was shut down for good. One of the biggest attractions at Woolbach Farm was the Haystack maze. They had a haunted hayride and pumpkin carving and corn mazes too. Every upstanding pumpkin patch does. But only Woolbach touted a pair of monumental, sprawling haystack mazes as the main event. Most haystack mazes are nothing to write home about. The walls are usually only a few feet high, so short that most kids are able to peer over the top of them. But the haystack mazes at Woolbach were different. These were massive, fully enclosed structures. Skeletons made of wooden pallets and chicken wire with bales of hay stacked all around to form a series of branching tunnels on the inside. Giant straw pyramids, a bona fide feat of farmhand engineering. There were 2 mazes, a smaller one for younger kids, and a bigger, more complicated one for the teenagers. Of course, I wanted to go in the bigger one, but anyone younger than 13 had to be accompanied by somebody older. My big sister clearly thought she was too grown up for the whole pumpkin patch thing, opting to sit on one of the swing sets and pick away at her Game Boy, while my mom joined me on an exhibition of the kids' maze. She held my hand as we ducked through the main entrance of the maze. The opening led straight into a central area with the first tunnel attached to it. It was much bigger than any other space inside the pyramid, with enough headroom that even an adult could stand straight up. Since the haystack maze had a roof made of wooden pallets and hay, it was pitch black inside. I was 10 at the time, and a bit of a scaredy cat. 4 years younger than my sister and deeply afraid of the dark. As scared as I was at the darkness of the haystack maze, I was excited for the opportunity to try out my new flashlight. It was just a small plastic piece of shit that they gave to all of the kids at my dad's company barbecue, but I was absolutely blown away by it. The flashlight was hand-powered. A small crank protruded from the back end that you had to turn to charge up the battery. This was well before smartphones came around, so it was the perfect breed of gimmicky device to boggle my early 2000s kid mind. Watch this. I flicked my flashlight on, extremely proud of how bright it was. I had spent the whole car ride there winding it up, getting as much juice in it as possible. My mom acted super impressed. I stuck to her like glue for the first few minutes. The tunnels were much smaller than the first room, meant to be navigated by crouching or crawling. Some tunnels had wooden ramps leading up to a second level. Eventually, I got more comfortable and started running ahead, scoping out possible dead ends while my mom crawled behind me. Even with my mom there, it felt a little eerie. Being surrounded on all sides by thick bales of hay had a sort of noise-canceling effect. All of the footsteps around us sounded muffled, and I could clearly hear my own breathing despite being surrounded by other kids. The air was hot and stuffy and claustrophobic. The kids' maze was well occupied, but there were still some empty pockets here and there, routes that were clearly dead ends after just a few steps. I made a point to check every nook and cranny. As I peered around the corner of one of these dead ends, the beam of my flashlight met a sight that made my heart drop. A small boy sat huddled in the corner, facing away from me. His shoulders shook, and he whipped his head around as soon as I appeared. My flashlight hit his face, and I saw tears on his cheeks. He looked only a year or 2 younger than myself. Clearly overstimulated by the whole affair, he brought his knees closer up to his chin and silently wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Hi, honey." My mom had caught up with me. "Are you lost?" She had the sweetest voice. The boy nodded. "Is your mom with you?" He shook his head, fresh tears welling up in his eyes. I could tell he was embarrassed, and I felt bad for him. "We're lost too," I said, holding my hand out. The boy smiled, took my hand, and picked himself off the ground. "What's your name?" my mom asked. "Henry." "Nice to meet you, Henry. Do you have a flashlight?" "It died." He held out a small Buzz Lightyear-themed flashlight and flipped the switch to demonstrate how its batteries had failed him. "That's okay, Simon can share his. Right, Simon?" I nodded, jumping at any excuse to show off my favorite gadget. "You know," my mom said, leadingly, "there's a secret trick we can use to find our way out of here." Henry and I leaned in. My mom stuck her right hand out to the side, touching the wall of hay next to her. "This maze isn't very big. There's only so many ways we can go. We only get lost if we lose track of what we've checked already. So if we pick one wall and keep following it no matter what, we'll find our way out." Looking back, her method was far from perfect. The stick-to-one-wall approach might work if you applied it from the very start of a maze, but because we were already inside, the wall to our right could have easily been a freestanding divider fully contained within. Doing this could have led us in circles if the maze were complex enough. Fortunately for us, the kids' maze was intentionally straightforward. With the three of us sticking to one wall, we found the exit in just a few minutes. Henry's mother was waiting for us on the other side, looking worried. She exchanged niceties with my mom, thanking her for helping Henry out. She said that he had insisted on tackling the maze without her. I felt a sting of shame knowing that this kid who was younger than me had proven himself more independent. Henry and I spent the rest of the day running around together. We did the corn maze, sat next to each other on a hayride, even went back through the kids' haystack maze again. I used to get picked on a lot, so it was nice to make a new friend outside of school. After making our way out of the kids' maze a third time, we decided that we were ready for something more challenging. We begged our moms to take us inside the bigger maze, but they waved away the idea, tuckered out from the day's events. "What if Zoe took us?" I asked, prompting my sister to tear her attention away from Fire Emblem for the first time all day. Right, like I want to go running around in the dark with a couple of kids. Zoe's words cut me, though I don't think she meant for them to come out as harshly as they did. Upon seeing my face fall, she begrudgingly agreed to join us. A freckle-faced farm boy wearing a Grim Reaper cloak over his blue jeans stood watch at the entrance of the PG-13 Haystack maze. He told Zoe to stay by our sides at all times. This maze started just like the kids' maze, with a big, open chamber and a single tunnel leading forward, though there was a clear sense of larger scale. Zoe plopped down on a haystack bench and flipped her Game Boy back open. "Aren't you coming with us?" I stuttered. "Why did you want to do this if you're too chicken shit to go in yourself?" she groaned. Henry shifted uncomfortably on the balls of his feet. "I'm not chicken shit," I said, puffing my chest out. "Just come get me when you're done," she said. "Won't that guy know you didn't stay with us when we go back through the front?" She laughed. "Like I care about getting in trouble with some hick." And with that, I flicked my flashlight back on. Henry and I steeled ourselves and set off down the first tunnel. Right off the bat, I could tell there were way less people in this maze. Faint footsteps from above were few and far between. We only passed one other group of people after the first fork. A teenage boy eyed us down as we passed, likely guessing we weren't supposed to be there alone. Henry's company washed away a lot of the unease, but I quickly realized that we were in over our heads. It didn't take long for us to get turned around. "Maybe we should go back and try from the start," said Henry. "Nah," I said, not wanting to admit that I didn't remember the route we took. "This place isn't that big. I bet we're almost there." We passed the same group of teenagers again. It was a good indicator that we were going in circles, but we were both too timid to ask for help. I cranked the flashlight's battery a bit as we hit dead end after dead end. It wasn't showing any signs of losing power, but the fear of losing our only light source was starting to dawn on me. "Are we supposed to go this way?" Henry's question broke my train of thought. I followed his pointer finger to the wall with the beam of my flashlight and saw a small gap in the haystacks. Some of the hallways in that maze were pretty cramped, but this was the smallest opening we had come across. So small, in fact, that I had walked right past it. To answer his question, I wasn't sure. The entrance was no bigger than 3 feet tall. Even we would have to get down on all fours to fit through it, and it didn't seem likely that the people who built this thing would expect teenagers to fit through it all. The hole was just small enough to appear unintentional, but just big enough to suggest that it was the way forward. "Can't hurt to try," I said. Henry was a head shorter than me, so he went in first. I squeezed through behind him, holding the flashlight out in front of me. The opening was deceptively deep, stretching far enough to be considered a tunnel on its own. Henry stopped in his tracks halfway through, wary of its unexpected length. "You're sure this is part of it?" Henry called over his shoulder. "Look, there's an opening right there." I pushed him forward. The small tunnel led out in the middle of a standard-sized one. As Henry came out the other side, I heard a muffled laugh and some scampering footsteps above us. Henry stumbled as he tried to get on his feet, falling back into me. I was still crawling out of the shortcut, and he fell right onto my outstretched arm, holding the flashlight. My heart sank as the flashlight was sandwiched between Henry and the dirt. It didn't go out, but when he rolled off of it, I saw that the hand crank used to charge it had completely broken off. I frantically started rooting around in the hay for the handle. "Is everything okay?" Henry asked, his voice shaky. My hand found the little plastic knob. Yeah, everything's okay." I went to pop the crank back into place, only to find that it had snapped off in a way that was truly irreparable. The handle left behind a good chunk of plastic in the hole that it had been dislodged from. I tried forcing it back in, but it just popped right back out when I went to turn it. I heard Henry's breath quicken. "It's okay," I assured him. Before now, our age difference had seemed negligible, but all of the sudden I felt that it was my responsibility to calm his nerves. "Look, I can still turn it like this." I plugged the hole with my finger and started twisting it. There was only about a millimeter of open space left for my finger to latch onto, but it provided just enough leverage for me to rotate the disc like a rotary phone dial. As the mechanism whirred, jagged remnants of the plastic crank dug into my skin. I winced and withdrew my finger, but Henry seemed convinced. I helped Henry back up to his feet. "Come on, we'll be out of here in no time." I couldn't have been more wrong. After going through that opening in the hay, we walked for what felt like an hour. Occasionally, we would hit a fork in the road and pick a way forward at random. We tried doubling back to the small tunnel that had led us here, but we never came across that opening again. Eventually, the flashlight started to dim. It was a slow fade. By the time I realized what was happening, our visibility had been cut in half. I tried to charge it as much as I could bear to, rotating fingers until all of them were bright red and stinging. There wasn't much use to it. The mechanism ran off of kinetic energy, and I could only get in a few turns at a time before the tips of my fingers would rub raw. We started calling out at any footsteps from the floor above us, but those had become even more infrequent. The slow depreciation of our flashlight went completely unspoken for what seemed like forever. Neither one of us wanted to bring it up. I only know that he saw it too, because the more it dimmed, the more our pace quickened. We were full on sprinting through the maze. At that point, we could barely see more than a foot ahead of us. I made a turn and Henry missed it, running headfirst into a wall of hay. He fell backwards onto his butt. Tears started streaming down his cheeks for the second time that day. "Simon, we're lost," he cried. "I know." I could barely choke the words out. Our light was rapidly depleting, like the dying embers of a campfire. Henry screamed for his mom. I did the same. I felt sick to my stomach, but too hungry to vomit. My body was aching and out of breath, but the maze was far from done with us. I started cranking the flashlight with my finger as fast as I could. The bulb shot back to life, but I could only push past the pain for a few seconds. As soon as I took my finger out, it immediately started to dim again. The battery was too far gone, and the skin on the tip of my finger was in a nasty state. Henry was hyperventilating, clawing at a solid wall of hay and screaming like a maniac. "Henry?" He didn't even hear me over the sounds of his despair. "Henry!" I grabbed him by the shoulders, letting the flashlight fall at our feet. It illuminated us from below as I pulled him close to address him face to face while I still could. "Henry, the light is gonna go out," I finally admitted. He burst into a tirade of shrieking sobs. Snot and tears caked his face. It broke my heart seeing what little faith he had left, completely drained from his eyes. A knot sat high in the back of my throat. My mind raced for the right words as his face faded from my view. What would my mom say? "It's going to be dark and it's going to be scary," I said, doing my best to steady my voice. "I know we're lost, but we can still get out." No. "Henry, there has to be a way out. And even if we can't find it, it's only a matter of time before everyone comes looking for us." I grabbed his hand, and I stuck it to the wall right next to us. "We'll keep walking, and we'll make it to the end no matter what." The luminescent bulb's final glimmer sunk into his eyes. "Henry, will you walk with me?" His pupils disappeared into the dark. "Yes." "Yes." And with that, the light was completely snuffed out. I'm realizing now that I may not have been descriptive enough earlier. When that flashlight went out, we were cast into a darkness the likes of which I've never known before or since. Every wall and ceiling was packed thick with bales of hay. Even in the middle of the day, not an inkling of sunlight was able to pierce through the layers upon layers of crisscrossing straw. If somebody held their finger an inch away from your open eye, you would have no way of knowing it was there. Compounded with the hay's soundproofing quality, we were essentially lost in a labyrinthian sensory deprivation chamber. I let Henry cry it out for a while. When he finally spoke again, I could hear the resolve in his voice. "Okay, let's go." I kept my hand pinned to the wall as I stood up and instructed him to do the same. After a moment to collect ourselves, we set off again. It took a long time for us to adapt to the darkness. Just putting one foot in front of the other was a challenge. Henry kept bumping into me from behind, as we were completely unable to sync up our strides. We walked slow and steady. After walking headfirst into a left turn, I took to keeping my other arm stretched out in front of me. I started calling out turns as we came across them, not wanting to overshoot and risk taking my hand off of the wall. We took lots of breaks. The feeling of pins and needles crept into our outstretched arms frequently. We didn't talk any more than we had to. Outside of calling out turns, I kept my thoughts to myself. My ears rang in the sickening silence. I felt some slight comfort in hearing Henry's feet dragging behind me, though it was entirely outweighed by a dread which grew exponentially with each passing second. We just kept going and going and going. Winding paths forked into more winding paths. We circled dead end after dead end. We weaved our way through countless corners and endless entrails, walking and walking and walking still. And as we walked, things started to change. First, I felt it in my feet. The ground beneath us became firm. I thought we had made our way onto some wooden boards, but when I knelt down, I still felt dirt. I still felt dirt, but the dirt felt different. It felt as if the dry soil was giving way to a more solid material, slowly rising from the earth as we advanced. The walls started to feel different too. Strands of hay began to feel sparse until the bouncy, dry texture was replaced by the smooth, cold feel of cobblestone. Even the air started to feel less stuffy. "Simon, do you feel it?" I didn't have to ask what he meant. "Yeah, let's stop for a second." I plugged my finger back into the flashlight, which I had fastened to my belt loop since it went out. I took a deep breath and started turning. Once again, the plastic bit into my finger. The hallway lit up around us. I was terrified to learn the details of our new surroundings. Somehow, as soon as we could see again, my fears were redirected in a way that I could never have predicted. As light filled the area, the feeling of hay and dirt beneath our feet returned. The walls, the ceiling, it was all hay. The stuffiness and stillness returned, as though the air around us reverted back to that of the Haystack maze. Henry looked ghoulish, sweaty and covered in dirt, desperation in his eyes. I'm sure I looked just as bad. I pulled my finger out of the flashlight when it drew blood, and the light started to die once more. As the room around us disappeared from view, The feeling of the cold, stony atmosphere returned. There were no words to be said. I couldn't bring myself to believe the reality of where we were, and I couldn't fathom the possibility of where we might end up. Henry whimpered as we were cast back into unequivocal darkness. "I don't like this," said Henry. "Let's go back." "Back the way we came?" "Yeah." I racked my brain for a better idea. "Okay." We turned on our heels, swapping hands on the wall. I had no faith left in the wall method, but clinging to it was the only way for us to retain some sense of direction. I think we were doing it for comfort more than anything. Henry was now in the lead, taking us back the way we came. I expected the familiar feeling of hay beneath our feet to return as we retraced our steps, but that feeling did not come. If anything, the following hours made it even more clear that no matter which way we went, each step took us further into parts unknown. I heard the sound of our shoes against the hard stone reverberating more and more as we continued. Our steps accumulated a sizable echo, suggesting that we had ventured into some sort of wide-open space the size of a coliseum. I even felt a cold breeze. I stuck my free arm out to the right in an attempt to reach the other side of the tunnel, but it only found open air. I felt numb to the surrealism of the situation. I had abandoned all disbelief hours ago. Even if we had spent a significant amount of time walking in circles, there was no way we wouldn't have stumbled across the exit by now. The texture of the wall and the feel of the room continued to evolve as we walked. The air became thick and dry once more. The stone texture beneath my fingertips began to soften until it felt akin to some sort of crumbling sedimentary rock. I heard the sound of crackling fire, as if large torches lined the wall above our heads, yet they cast no light, and we felt no warmth from the invisible flames. I grunted as I ran right into Henry, sandwiching him against a wall in front of us. It had been so long since we hit a turn, I guess he had stopped holding a hand out ahead of him. My nose smacked into the back of his head. Stars danced in my eyes. The force almost knocked my hand off the wall, but I managed to keep hold of it. "Shoot," I said, rubbing my nose with my free hand. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. My heart started pounding ferociously. Henry, are you there?" Yes," he squeaked. His voice was barely a whisper. Whatever we had just hit, it had shaken him to his core. "What is it?" I pleaded. I jumped as I heard a whisper directly in my ear. It was Henry's voice. I hadn't heard him inch closer. His words were barely audible, but they punched me right in the gut. "I think it's a door." I stood speechless for an eternity. "Are you sure?" I whispered. I felt his hand grip my wrist. I instinctively ripped it away from him. "Go in front of me," he said, still keeping his voice low. I felt him squeeze underneath my armpit to get behind me. I steadied my breath, took a step forward, and stuck out my left hand. It was met with a wall of solid wood. I could feel the coarse, splintery grain as soon as my fingertips hit its surface. Hairs rose on the back of my neck. I slid my hand to the position where I would expect to find a doorknob, and I found one. The metal was warm, an unnerving juxtaposition to the cool air we had been experiencing as of late. I didn't try to turn it. In school, they told us that when a door handle is warm, that means there's a fire on the other side. That was reason enough for me not to open the door, but it wasn't the only one. A foreboding sense of anticipation crept up my spine as soon as my hand felt the knob. I can't explain it, but I could tell that there was someone, or something, standing right on the other side of that door, waiting for us to open it. I took my hand off the knob. "Let's turn back around," I whispered, not wanting to question or even acknowledge our horrifying discovery. "Okay," Henry replied, likely feeling the same. Even now, I have no idea how long we were actually in that maze for. I tried counting as high as I could to pass the time, and I stopped somewhere in the thousands. Hours felt like minutes, but seconds felt like days. Realistically, we had only been without food or water for a handful of hours, but I'm sure that the time we spent running around in a panic had expedited our hunger and dehydration. We took breaks more frequently. Blisters had formed on my heels. My knees felt like they might buckle beneath me at any moment. I began to miss the sweat on my forehead that had stung my eyes while we were in the thick air of the haystacks. I began to wonder if we would walk for days until exhaustion overtook us. "I need to go to the bathroom," said Henry. His voice took me by surprise. I figured he had already gone in his pants like I had, but I guess he had been holding it the whole time. "Okay," I said, slowing to a stop. "I'm gonna go a couple steps ahead. Call me when you're done." I did as I said, sinking down to a crouch with my back against the wall as he did his business. As I heard the sounds of his relief, a ping of revelation struck me. I slapped my hand against the cold stone of the ground and heard no echo ring out after. Wherever we were now, the lacking acoustics suggested that tunnel had become narrow again. I heard Henry pull up his zipper and I walked back towards him. "I think we should try to touch the other wall," I said. "What?" "I think the tunnel is small now. We should try to get to the other wall and see if that leads us out." He didn't have to think about it long. The path we were already on hadn't helped. "Keep your hand on this one," I said, finding his shoulder again, "and stretch out as far as you can." I felt him spread his arms wide, and I followed his left arm out into the middle of the hallway that I hoped we were standing in. We locked hands and I stretched as far away from the wall as I could, begging for the tip of my middle finger to brush against another wall. But that other wall wasn't there, and in my strain to find it, I accidentally pulled Henry too far. Suddenly we were falling to the right, the opposite direction from which we had been leaning. I toppled on top of Henry in the space where the wall had been a split second ago. My palm struck the cold, hard ground, catching me just before my face would have hit it. Henry wasn't so lucky. I heard him groan as the back of his head smacked against a floor hard as granite. "Are you okay?" I screamed out. He moaned. "Did you let go of the wall?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Just for a second," he mumbled. I shot to my feet and frantically started shuffling around in the dark, waving my arms out in front of me like a zombie. I didn't feel anything. The wall was gone. Our only tie to the maze had vanished into thin air the second we let it out of our touch. Tears flowed. I screamed as loud as I could. I screamed for my mom. I screamed for God. Nobody answered. I felt Henry curl up on the ground by my feet. As my voice broke, I collapsed on top of him, molding us into a human heap of misery. We sat there in silence for quite a while, hungry, tired, and completely consumed by the darkness. I have no words to describe the complete and utter hopelessness I felt. Henry laid his head on my lap. I felt his tears soak into the fabric of my jeans. I brushed a comforting hand through Henry's hair, and I felt a warm, sticky substance oozing out of the back of his head. My stomach sank through the floor. "Henry?" "Yeah," he replied, his voice broken and faint. "Are you sure you're okay?" His grip on me loosened a bit. "Yeah." I let that sit for a moment. "Do you want to keep walking?" I asked. I felt him lightly shake his head no against my lap. "You want to stay here?" He nodded. "Okay. We'll wait for them to come find us." Henry's breathing became labored. I sat and stroked his hair and closed my eyes. This is where we would die. I was sure of it. After everything that we had been through, it didn't seem that bad. We had slipped into a crack between worlds, lost in a boundless, incomprehensible void, betrayed by our reality, forgotten by our God. There was nothing left to do but sit and cry and wait, and then, out of the dark, we heard him. At first, he was just a pair of creeping footsteps in the distance. They appeared so subtly that I didn't even process them until they were almost upon us. I thought they were a trick of my imagination, but sure enough, a deep booming voice soon rang out to accompany them. "You boys lost?" The sound of another voice was so unnatural to me. Maybe it was the hunger or the exhaustion or the pure emotional turmoil, but I swear the voice sounded exactly like my father's. "Dad?" Henry called out from my lap. A low chuckle split the air. "No, I'm not your father," the shadow man cooed. "I'm just a friend." As he inched closer, I heard that our visitor was not alone. His footsteps were joined by those of a four-legged animal. Claw tips clacking against the hard floor suggested it was some sort of large dog. Suddenly, his animalistic companion bounded towards us. I braced myself and pulled Henry close to my chest as I felt the cold, wet prodding of a large snout against our bodies. Sniffing and snorting like that of a basset hound filled the air. I could hear a large metal chain dangling from its neck, the other end no doubt held by the mysterious man. "You boys seem mighty lost," he said. On the surface, he sounded concerned, but the more he talked and the closer he got to us, I sensed a jovial undercurrent in his words, like someone trying their best to suppress a smile. "Can you get us out of here?" Henry pleaded. "Of course I can," said the man. He was now standing right in front of us. "I came here to collect you." I heard the basset hound go off towards the spot where Henry had relieved himself earlier. It sniffed around a bit before returning to us. I heard the chain settle as it sat at its master's heel. "How can you see us?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Do you have a flashlight?" "Don't need one," the man said, a slight twinge of annoyance in his voice. "I've done my fair share of rootin' around in the dark. Guess my eyes have adjusted to it." I tried to visualize what he might look like. I did my best to keep the nondescript shape of a man's face in my mind as he spoke, but the dancing fuzz of my vision kept contorting his features into something unnatural. I heard a shuffling, and the proximity of the man's voice when he next spoke suggested that he had knelt down to address us. "You're in a rough shape," the shadow man sighed. "Please get us out of here," Henry moaned. "Well," said the man, "I sure would like to, but I can only take one of you at a time." I couldn't believe my ears. "What do you mean?" I pressed. "Why can't you take both of us with you?" "This boy is far too hurt. Trying to manage both of you at once would just slow us down," the man said, his voice rife with false emotional strain. "Wish there was another way, but that's just how it is." "What are you talking about?" I growled. "I'll walk right behind you." "I said no," he boomed. His baritone shook my body so hard that my teeth clattered. "One child at a time, that's the rule," he growled. He sounded exasperated at the notion, as if the rule were not of his own design. My gut told me not to follow this man anywhere, but the thought of being separated from Henry petrified me. The man let out another deep sigh. "Don't you worry. As long as you stay right where you are, I'll be able to get you just fine. What do you say, son?" I was scared and confused and filled with a million questions, but far too weak to protest further. Despite my complete lack of sight, I felt the unmistakable aura of an outstretched hand in front of me. I went to meet it, and upon feeling the leathery flesh of his palm, an icy jolt of terror shot through my veins. I had been trying as hard as I could to keep the basic image of a human man's face in my mind, but in that moment, the dancing specks behind my eyes insisted on warping those features into something horrifying. I tried so hard not to imagine him as a towering, slender figure with spindly arms that stretched multiple yards long, so long that he had to fold them over thrice, like the crooked legs of an exotic bird, just to offer his hand to me this close in proximity. I tried not to imagine a robust potbelly jutting out of his otherwise slender frame, covered in thick black fur and hanging low over his legs, which were just as long as his arms and folded up like an accordion. I tried not to imagine his face as a gaunt, eyeless visage with dark, rugged skin stretched tight around an impossibly wide grin. I tried not to imagine a pair of ivory horns atop his head that spiraled several feet up towards the heavens. I tried and tried and tried to keep that ghastly depiction out of my head, but for as long as he held my hand in his, it persisted in my mind's eye as if it were an unquestionable truth. I withdrew my hand from his grasp, awestruck with a terror that I cannot possibly describe. I pulled Henry as close as I humanly could, and I whispered directly into his ear, "Henry, I don't think we should go with him. I think we should stay here." The man definitely heard me, but he didn't react. He remained crouched in front of us, skeletal fingers held out in offer. "I want my mom," Henry whispered. He felt limp, like a rag doll in my arms. "Please, son, I reckon he ain't got much time left," taunted the shadow man. I had no tears left to cry. Henry was dying in my arms. Whatever might happen to him should I let him go, he wouldn't last much longer here. I loosened my grip as I felt Henry's arm leave my lap. I whimpered and felt him being tugged away. "Don't worry," the man sneered. "I'll carry you." I heard the hound pull at its chain and set off into the dark. The footsteps of the man followed behind it. "You stay put," I heard him call over his shoulder. "I'll come back for you later." I curled up in a ball as the footsteps became increasingly faint. My mind raced with the possible outcomes of my decision. What awaited Henry in the arms of the shadow man? Did he really intend to help? Or had Henry just met a terrible fate? My thoughts were bombarded with untold horrors that might be in store. I imagined Henry's blood-curdling screams at the hands of the conniving specter. I could sense his suffering. I could hear his torment. I could feel his blood on my hands. I don't know what possessed me to finally get back on my feet. Maybe it was pure adrenaline, or my fear of the shadow man. But the newfound isolation was a big enough push for my survival instincts to fully kick in. I was struck with the sudden, intense realization that I had to get myself out of that maze, whatever the cost. I shot up so fast I nearly keeled over. I fumbled around for the carabiner latched onto my belt loop and freed the flashlight from its clasp. I took a deep breath and shoved the mangled tip of my pointer finger back into the hole. It was time for a Hail Mary. I gritted my teeth and began to spin the dial like my life depended on it. Needles of pain shot up my arm as I fed the mechanism with my suffering. Every second, the plastic shards dug into my skin felt like a hot lick of hellfire, but I viciously worked it round and round until the room began to illuminate. Once again, the sight of the hay walls and a dirt floor began to creep into view, but that wasn't all this time. As the light brought me out of that dark, endless void, I began to hear muffled voices and footsteps all around me for the first time in days. They were looking for me. They were looking for us. A wave of relief crashed over me, but it stole my mind from the task at hand. My cranking had slowed, and the light began to dim again. As it faded, so did the sounds of my salvation. I was slipping away, back into the dark. I took off running, the promise of rescue reinvigorating my work on the flashlight. I winced as it shredded my skin, alternating fingers until each one was coated by the steady drip of fresh blood. I cried out as much as I could, my voice raspy from overuse and dehydration. I ducked and weaved, desperate to make contact with someone, lest I fall back into the darkness. I turned a corner and finally I was met with the glow of another flashlight. I dropped to my knees, letting the bloody hunk of plastic clatter to the ground. Beams of light bounced toward me, accompanied by the worried cries of my rescuers. The next thing I remember was waking up in the arms of a stranger. Daylight scorched my retinas as a teenager carried me out of the maze. It seemed impossible for the sun to still be up, but time spent was the farthest thing from my mind. Through a blur of tears, I saw my mother frantically screaming at a bunch of farmhands. My sister shrank behind her, face snow-white with guilt. A crowd of people was forming around them. Whoever found me hadn't been searching for long. I barely remember anything that happened once I was out of the maze. I remember being delivered into my mother's arms. I remember how tightly she held me while I told the firefighters about everything that had happened in the maze. I remember my sister crying profusely. I remember waiting there past sunset while a team of first responders and farmers dismantled the Haystack maze bale by bale. I remember Henry's mom pacing back and forth as the layers were slowly peeled away. I remember her screaming and bawling and slamming her fists in the dirt when they removed the last stack. And Henry was nowhere to be found. I remember all of that now. But to be honest, I didn't remember anything that I've written here until just a few months ago. Back in July, a couple of Zoe's friends and I staged an intervention about her drinking. She never made it past high school, and by the time I got home from my first year of college this spring, she had a reputation around town for being a total barfly. I think her friends were worried about her getting worse when I went back in the fall, but I wasn't sure why. We'd barely spoken for years. She lashed out at me as soon as she saw the circle of chairs in her living room. She claimed that I was the reason she couldn't keep her face out of a bottle, and wept about how a little boy went missing because of her carelessness. At first, I had no idea what she was talking about, but the more she spilled about everything from that day, the more those memories poured back into my head. The stone hallways, the wooden door, the man who took Henry, everything. Even as I write this, new memories from my time in the Haystack float to the surface. I feel adrift in a river of recollection, grasping out at small islands of information as they pass. Whenever I manage to latch onto one and start digging, I uncover the same system of roots connecting them all below the murky depths. I don't dare ask my mom about that day, but I've done my research. No matter what actually happened in that maze, a little boy named Henry went in and never came out. The local papers all say that he was led away by a strange man who took him off the farm. Nobody saw the two of them leave. Nobody knew what the man looked like, but I know. Try as I might, I still can't shake the sight of him from my mind. I can't escape the familiar sound of his voice. When I'm left alone with my thoughts, my ears replay his parting words to me like a broken record. My fear of the dark had already followed me into adulthood, but since remembering all of this, it has amplified immensely. I haven't slept much these past few months. Even when I crash from exhaustion, I always do so with the lights on. I've avoided going anywhere after sunset, and I never let my phone battery dip. I haven't gone to the movies or anywhere that would put me at risk of finding myself in total darkness. I'm not sure why I chose to share my story here. Maybe seeing all of the Halloween decorations going up around town stirred some guilt. I don't want any kid out there to go through what I did, and I definitely don't want anyone else to end up like Henry. Part of me thinks Henry is still out there. I don't know if that would be a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe I'll try to go back someday, shut myself in my closet with the lights off and try to find him. For now, sharing my story is all I can stomach to do, because I know that even if Henry is somehow still alive, he won't be alone. "I'll come back for you later," the strange man had said. "Out there in the dark, I know he waits for me still."